Great. I want to welcome everyone to today's Unhurried Conversations, number 6. And we have a very special guest today. It's Cathryn Barnard. She co-founded Working the Future in 2016 to help business leaders prepare for and adopt to the future of work. And that's, again, the name of the company is Working the Future. Today, she and her team provide organizations with work trend intelligence and advisory services to help create easy to implement people-centered future-proofing strategies. Kat's based in the UK, and her career in workforce planning spans 3 decades, including broad experience in setting up centralized recruitment functions. So I'm sure she'll have a bit to talk about in that topic today and where the industry has moved with such centralization of talent recruitment. Kat's one of our fellow members, and this is quite exciting, of the all-volunteer, globally connected group, the Carbon Almanac Network, which not only got the book written, but also has a number of other services associated with it. We're excited about that. And with that background added to her work experience, Kat clearly recognizes the criticality of social connection in accelerating team performance and business results. Her organizational and recruitment redesign workplaces human relationships right at the heart of achieving commercial success outcomes. Now, Kat, thanks again for joining us for this EarthWork Collective Unhurried Conversation and anything else that I left out that our viewers might wish to know about you.
Gosh, no, thank you very much for having me on today, Scott. And I think that was a beautiful intro. So thank you very much for that too.
You're very welcome. Etrit and I are excited to get started. The very first question that I put together was, you talk about working the future. What's going to be different working the future versus working now, or maybe the way it was 5 or 10 years ago? And what maybe a little bit more about what your firm offers its clients to help with that question and with getting the answers?
Gosh, okay. Where to begin? So I think that 5 years from now, our labour markets and organisational makeups could look substantially different to the way that they look currently. I think, to all intents and purposes, we are kind of coming to the end of a paradigm of work where labour markets have been very employer-led and approaches to employment have been very standardized and skewed towards a one-size-fits-all approach. And that doesn't work anymore. And certainly in the West, we have declining birth rates and shrinking labour markets, actually fewer people joining the workforce nationally than are leaving it. And they're coming with a completely different set of attitudes and expectations, not least our digital natives, our youngest cohorts who've grown up not knowing life without the internet. They interact differently. They have different expectations of what work is going to offer them, how they want their leaders to lead, and a whole myriad different type of demand on employment and employers that I don't think most organizations are geared up towards. In essence, there's a range of trends that are converging at the moment to cause quite severe complexity. I think complexity by itself is probably quite extreme, but severe complexity, I don't think we're used to complexity. I think we're used to believing that we exist in complicated systems where solutions can be found, but we've left those shores of safety and security, and we're kind of in uncharted territory. So you asked the second question, Scott, what do we do at Working the Future? Well, we set the business up 7 years ago, primarily because we saw a gap in the UK market where these trends were already in train, they were already in play, and there was not enough public discourse. So really, the main thrust of our work is to act as an advisory body, imparting data-driven insights to organizations to help them understand how and why the nature of work is changing. In terms of solutions, I'd say our approach is entirely collaborative because, quite simply, every single organization has a different operating context, and to attempt to apply a one-size-fits-all approach is simply compounding issues that organizations already have. We have to start thinking in terms of mass customization on what works in one organization to foster engagement and create environments where people can deliver their best work is not going to work in the next one. I think it's incumbent now on each and every leader to step up or step out and, lead from the heart or move along.
Thank you so much for this. Lots of questions coming up, but I'll begin with the first one. You talked about the end of a paradigm. What would you say is the new paradigm that is being born? Like, is the new paradigm being born, or are we still experiencing the pangs of death of the old paradigm? Is the new paradigm here yet?
No, I think we are in a liminal state right now. I think we can see probably in most political systems the last hurrah of patriarchal populist leaders who are quite determined to hold on to outdated ways of showing up in the world. And I think that behind those leaders sits money and therefore sits power. But I also see the manifestation of distributed power at a grassroots level. And sometimes I wonder if we might end up experiencing almost like a two-tier economy where you'll have the old rules of the old game continuing to be played by people who ascribe and aspire to the old guard, and then a completely new type of economic parameter where people who feel entirely disengaged or excluded from that old paradigm come and collect and convene and cooperate and create together in almost a different marketplace, a different context.
So
And
you're talking about some sort of interregnum where both things are coexisting.
Yeah, I find it really curious, and obviously that's the nature of complexity, as nobody knows, right? But it is bizarre to me that some of the most dominant narratives we hear at the moment, apropos of economic progress, if that's even the right word to use, and the future of tech, it's all predicated on systems sustaining themselves that aren't sustaining themselves because they're broken. Inequality and inequity are manifestations of broken systems, and the existing economic paradigm that is making rich people richer and poor people poorer is disenfranchising more and more people who don't want to participate in or collaborate in a system that is so destructive and damaging. And I see that distributed power, the decentralized organizing that has manifested as a consequence of the internet. I see that as being something that too few politicians and technocrats really fully understand.
And does it really matter if there are those two tiers? Because, one of the questions I was going to ask you was what skills, attitudes, knowledge does a worker of the future right now need to start really looking at? But really, no matter what they do, unless they're truly powering, leading an organization with all that comes with that, how much influence are they going to be able to have? You know, you started in the tech arena, right? I mean, you staffing in the tech arena, or you focused in that area? And, you know, we talk a lot, there's been movies made about, well, the tech arena, it was really a Trojan horse. You know, there was a lot of what we did. You know, you've heard conversations about Facebook and others. We went out there, we knew what we were doing to try to change the way people lived, social media and so forth. But then they said, well, we got out and, you know, it's a good thing we don't do that anymore. But plenty others took their place. So how can someone prepare themselves, and how can someone, more importantly, construct a career around this potential two-tiered system you talk about?
So I'll try and answer the first question that I think I heard you ask. You asked me about what kind of skills, attitudes, and behaviours people will need moving forward to kind of survive and thrive. And I think they are antithetical to the ones that the business schools would have us believe are the ones that we need. So I've made some notes, and I'm going to just run through my list. First and foremost, I think we need courage, and we need perspective. We need to be able to see ourselves as tiny players in a much, much bigger interconnected system, a biosystem. If we can see ourselves as we are in nature, then I think that's an excellent grounding point. But I think courage to stand up and resist what doesn't feel intuitively right in our hearts and in our guts is really important. And I'm sure that there may be some people listening to this who think that I'm now spouting nonsense, but I would encourage and invite anybody that does think that to go and look at the research that has found that we have as many neurons in our hearts and our guts as we do in our brains. I mean, there is clearly something going on in our biological systems that we've yet to fully understand. I would say critical thinking is huge, and unfortunately the systems in which we exist at the moment discourage critical thinking. You know, the whole attention economy is geared up towards distraction and keeping us engaged on capitalist platforms where our behaviors become monetizable data points for those vested interests. But critical thinking is absolutely crucial to complex problem solving. I was on a call earlier today, actually, with an academic from one of the British universities who was bemoaning a dearth of critical thinking in our academic facilities because, and I know, Scott, you and I have talked about this in the past, you know, our academic systems are becoming more and more monetized, and therefore all focus is on the end result and getting as many people passed through the system of certification or qualification as quickly as possible by whatever means. And, you know, to what extent at the more junior levels of academia is critical thinking actively encouraged in this day and age? I think co-creation and collaboration and the social skills that we need to come together to interoperate in a way that works for the many rather than the few. Those are key skills. They're inherent skills. We have them, but they're marginalized in favor of, I don't know, MBAs or, you know, scientific methodology or what have you. We seem to be trying to write the art of business out of business in pursuit of the science of business. So I think the skills that we need most in the future of work are deeply human in nature. I think the challenge that we've got is that the environments in which most of us exist on a day-to-day basis are geared up towards discouraging us from focusing on the flexing of those skills. I think we have those skills inherently in our true natures, but we're constantly prone to distraction and to, you know, febrile entertainment And therefore, you know, we kind of need to come back to ourselves and really think about who we are, who we choose to be, what we have in our armor, not in our armory, in our psyche that can help us navigate and adapt to these new scenarios.
Thank you. I love that. I hear you say the need to align attention and intention. And this is a phrase that Professor Otto Scharmer uses, and I really like that. And there's a second phrase that goes, whatever you pay attention to grows. So where is our attention and what are we doing with it? Seems more crucial than ever. And
yeah, 100%, 100%. And I think what's really interesting is to take a step back and consider that almost everything that we experience in the modern age is made up, it's man-made. We're not living in our natural states. And therefore, it's hard to see ourselves as creatures of nature.
One of the things, believe it or not, at EarthWork, our whole course that we're developing right now, not to really plug the course, but at the very beginning and throughout, it's all about how you cannot remove yourself from nature, because nature, and by the way, nature always finds a solution. Humanity may not, but nature finds a solution. It's part of the dialogue around climate change that we've all had with the Carbon Almanac and otherwise. And in fact, working some of the ways you talked about, that co-creation, that collaboration, and actually making it work on a completely volunteer basis, virtually, using those tools of mankind, but doing it in a truly get back with nature, not just to nature, but with nature environment. And so what you said really resonates with me, because I had to be reminded of that. And I think there's probably a few billion other people who have to be reminded of that around the world. And it does take time to even consider the possibility that everything I see right now might not be the best way it could be. You know, and maybe there are some better ways we can exist as humans. When you were on the Carbon Almanac team, and you know, whatever parts you were in, you witnessed firsthand how that really worked. And we got stuff done. We developed a product. We developed several other services around it, ancillary products. We did everything a company would do, but for some reason, everybody, or almost everybody for sure, left pretty happy, and they felt pretty fulfilled. How can that be translated to a business world, a business environment now?
I mean, it is a really good question. And one of the things that struck me as I was witness to that program of work was that I don't think I had experienced such goodwill and reciprocity in the way in which people showed up for one another for several decades. I mean, you know, I appreciate that I'm harking back, but when we built the mobile phone networks in the 1990s, there was such a spirit of collaboration and I guess, you know, a kind of pioneer spirit, because nothing had been done before. Everything was a complete blank canvas. We had targets and we had goals, but we also had permission not to get everything right first time, because who knew, we couldn't possibly have known whether we would get things right first time. And I think what struck me about the Carbon Almanac project was that the conditions of interoperability were set up and very, very clearly defined from the get-go. And every single week for the duration of the program, I think it was Louise in Australia would do Thank You Thursdays and just remind us all really to pay attention to who had helped us throughout the course of the week and who we'd been able to help, and just think about others aside from ourselves. And so the conditions were set right from the get-go that it was a collaborative effort where there was no single person in charge. And I think it was a really clever play, wasn't it? Because clearly we could have all very easily defaulted to assuming that Seth was in charge. But he's a really humble guy, and he was very at pains to say all the way through that he wasn't in charge, but he did it in a really discreet way by focusing our attention on the art of leadership and what leadership is all about. And I took away from the experience the reality that leadership isn't about who gets to drive the fastest car and park closest to the front desk. It's about who goes first and who paves the way for others to do great work. It's completely what we were taught about leadership during that project, I feel, is completely different to the patriarchal styles of power and command and control that we're seeing a doubling down of now. And I think it's it's really interesting to reflect on that, because what if our youngest generation of workers who know no different get the option to choose between leadership style A and leadership style B? And kids today are locked out of the housing market. They don't have the same expectation of work that we would have had 20 or 30 years ago. There's no skin in the game for them. So would you rather work somewhere that creates the right conditions for you to achieve your full potential, or work somewhere on the promise of making somebody else far wealthier? Yes, you'll earn some money, but you'll be worked like a dog for that money. Like, which one of those two are you going to choose? Because even if you can earn your $150,000, $200,000 a year, are you going to be able to get onto the property ladder? Are you going to be able to do the things that you might have hoped and dreamed for while you are still earning that money, with the expectation that to earn that money you have to give your employer 60-80 hour weeks? And how sustainable is that, right?
Yes. It makes me think about the changing nature of relationship, of leadership, and the way we relate to others, and also the way we relate to the self. And I'm wondering about your experience with how do organizations navigate the tension that exists between an individual wanting to be more autonomous and be able to pursue the passion at work, versus the organizations need to control and to have that culture, and to have that, like, this is who we are, that is different from everyone else. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Again, I think, it's going to be an interesting, a fascinating period to watch what happens next, because some of the styles of leadership that seem to be most in demand at the moment aren't new. When was the book Servant Leadership written? Was that like the 1970s? I can't even, and you've got Edgar, or who passed away sadly a couple of years ago, but Ed Sheen, who wrote Humble Leadership. When leaders focus on those around them and understand that the progress that they make in their silos is going to be always far less than they could make if they harnessed the goodwill and potential of people around them, it stands to reason that you would prioritize the wants and needs of those around you first and foremost. And I think that's the thing, what is the role of a leader? A role of a leader isn't to feature on the Forbes rich list, or, go for a minimal amount of days at the beginning of the year to stand out on the CEO pay gap. The role of the leader surely must be to go first and to pave the way, or eke out the best conditions, the best environmental conditions in which a wider team can flourish. And I appreciate that I say this with the benefit of 3 decades in the workplace, but I fully feel Like, I had a brilliant career in my 20s, and I feel desperately sad that people in their 20s in this day and age are increasingly locked out of it, of those opportunities. But I feel like my work is to pass the baton, actually. That's, you know, to role model what good work can look like, to role model what good leadership can look like, and then to pass the baton and to create the conditions. And again, I come back to, you know, this is fork in the road time, because I don't doubt that for the select few for whom Lamborghini orders and Patek Philippe orders and holidays in Dubai, you know, are paramount, I don't doubt that they will continue to try and uphold the status quo. But I think there's a rising tide of others who want different things.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that what we see in the media, all the short-term results, the short-termism is becoming so much more pronounced than it used to be earlier in my career. I mean, I could, just like you, look back over my career. The companies truly were dedicated to accomplishing a mission, and however long to take to get to that mission, they did it. And they were given that reign by their investors. But now, the media that allows everyone to know everything about everyone all the time, latest, greatest data. Unfortunately, there are people who think that data somehow means that value is now solely about money. And the whole capitalist argument is kind of funny, because all the things you just said about leaders, I don't think most of the leaders got into it just to make money. There certainly are people who did, but other ones got in it because they wanted to actualize something they learned or something they believed in and really make things happen. You know, in the sports world, it's I want to win, but I want to win, usually people will say, with my teammates, to be a part of something, right? So as young people come up, I think they're looking, I would imagine they're looking for better examples, like you said, than they're seeing right now. And maybe you could talk about, this is the question, things you've done, things you can do through community of work at Working the Future, that you can start getting the thought patterns changed. Because I do think there's a mind shift that has to be made amongst especially leaders.
So I think one of the most important things that we can and must do as leaders now is to listen. Like, my two examples would be, how can we innovate and evolve the products and services that our organizations make if we're not listening to what our customers are telling us they want us to do? So listening to our customers is paramount, but also listening to the people that we've chosen to work with within the confines of our organization. We have to ask great questions and understand what those individuals' wants and needs are, because everybody is walking a different pathway. Everybody's circumstance and situation is different, you know. And I think listening is the most valuable and underutilized skill that any of us have. And I also think what is really interesting, and this bore out for me throughout my staffing career, it's one thing that you can do that costs next to nothing, but in the eyes of the receiver, it is all powerful. And I cannot tell you the amount of times in my recruiting career that I would get feedback, "Thank you so much for listening," or that I would be referred on as a recruiter to third parties that I would never have been introduced to otherwise as an expert recruiter, because I bothered to listen. And it seems kind of bizarre to me that I'm even saying that I bothered to listen. I mean, how odd is that?
And it's the challenge will be, don't be afraid of what you might hear. Drop that fear from your mindset and start thinking about the cool things, the opportunities you might find from listening.
Building on what you just said, Scott, actually, fear and fear of what we hear, but also the importance of listening. As I was reminded of, I don't remember the name of the podcast where I heard it, but the person was saying that there is something wrong with the way in which we frame the climate crisis, because we tell people to take a stance on it by giving up on something. It's always do less. Like it's almost as if we're talking about shrinking who we are and what we do, and that will be good for the planet. While in fact, this is a great opportunity to restructure everything.
You mentioned something, Scott, about our fear of whatever, but actually, if we were to let go of the fear, I think we would probably find our true selves, because you have to go through painful events in order to come out the other side and understand what is important to you personally. So one of the most compelling books that I've read in recent years is a book written by an end-of-life carer in Australia called Bronnie Ware. And she wrote the book in response to, she was a private carer. She used to be hired by families to look after people who were at the end of life in their homes, so private caring. And she noticed that in all the conversations that she was having with her clients at the end of their lives, that consistent themes were coming up. And she ended up writing this book, and it was called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, because time and again, these consistent themes came up, and I'm probably not going to be able to list them right now, but you know, things like, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. I wish I had lived a life that was authentically aligned to my true self. I wish I hadn't given up on my friends. I wish I wish I'd focused more on the world around me, whatever it was. But you know, what I think is interesting is to be able to afford private end-of-life care denotes that you are coming from a family of wealth. And to an absolute T, every single person at the end of their life was regretting things that don't cost any money. They just cost us our time and our attention. Like, let's pay attention, let's take a step back, and let's think about what really matters. And people sometimes ask me, am I a pessimist or an optimist apropos of the climate crisis? And I think I'm probably a realist. I think I'm infinitely fascinated by our species' capacity for survival. You know, when you think about how anthropologists and archaeologists are finding human remains that date back tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, and during that enormous time frame, weather patterns have changed. Human beings have got the amazing capacity for survival, but they don't do it in silos, because otherwise the species wouldn't survive. So let's come back to ourselves. Let's focus on what really matters in order to move through this, whatever it is. And I would also say the narrative that is imposed upon us about the climate crisis is exactly to your point about all the things that we will have to give up. Who is that narrative pushed by? Because actually, if you really think it through, people that ascribe to minimalism as a lifestyle are so much happier, because they're not locked into the constant need for mass consumption and accumulation of stuff that doesn't make them happier anyway.
Yeah, and great points, Kat. And it's only been a very short period of time when we've had the media and the interchange of information that has allowed those ideas to spread or whatever. Now we have a media that is in front of us 24/7. I think people might be quite fascinated to take and when they say, oh, I got away from it all. I went away to that island and I got away from it all. I just sat on the beach, or I went out in the forest and I did this. Well, there are people who do that all the time, and they'll say, you know what? I do that all the time, and it's always good. And when I come back, it's not really as good. come back to society and do all the things I'm required to do. So maybe there just needs to be more stories. Maybe people need to wake up. I'm not sure how to give that wake up call. Maybe we could shift to something really positive, which what have you seen in any of the companies you've called on that has really wowed you, that has made you think they've got it? You know, something you've seen that has really made you, given you that hope and a little bit more of optimism than just pragmatism.
So I think there are good, honourable, decent companies led by good, honourable, decent folk. How do we measure organisational success in this day and age? We measure two metrics: revenue and headcount. So these companies, these organisations will never feature in any kind of lists of success because they don't hit the right metrics. But there are great companies doing great things on a far a far less visible scale. And I guess I come back to, you know, is it Schumacher wrote the book in the 1970s, Small is Beautiful. I'm also really interested in the work of Robin Dunbar, the anthropologist who's looked at Dunbar's number and how communities, groups of people can scale into communities and what the optimal size is of a community before it starts to fragment and separate into separate communities. So I tend to think that the best companies are the companies that no one's heard of. What is an organization? That's quite a philosophical question, isn't it? What is an organization? It's just a group of people aligned around a shared vision or goal. So all these massive organizations of several 100,000 people, how aligned are they, and how engaged are every single internal stakeholder towards, you know, the pursuit of those goals? Because I don't know what it's like in your respective countries. I think actually, Scott, we will give the baton to you because America's doing slightly better than Europe on this score. But Gallup's State of the Global Workplace data last year in 2023 measured engagement in Europe at 13%. It's higher in America for a change, but it's,
Yeah.
I think yours is about 22%. But like, even so, that's like 78% of your workforce is disengaged, and what's our 87% disengaged? What does that tell you?
Yeah, I just keep thinking of a word to kind of wrap up what you just said. I keep thinking of that word scale, that MBAism that everyone talks about. But maybe we should be talking about sensible scale and scale that really will work as opposed to just generates money. And frankly, being married to an accountant, I can tell you that a lot of what they look at really does come down to money, what comes in, what goes out, what's invested. The reality is there isn't nearly as much conversation about how did we get that and what is it really good for once we have it. And I mean, it's just, I could go on, but I do believe that if people could shift their mind just a little to what we talked earlier about what they really enjoy and what really gave them, you know, real satisfaction in life, we may be turning that a bit, because at this point, the funnel, the sales funnel is getting so, you know, they're enlarging it to get more and more in, but they're squeezing everything down. All those cost inputs are being squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. Employees being laid off en masse from companies that have just reported record earnings. Now, anybody has got to know that that doesn't make sense, but yet it makes sense to the corporate world, or to maybe a PE investor, you know, a private equity firm or someone else. They're like, yeah, that makes sense. But to you and me, that makes absolutely no sense. If you have record profits, why have salaries not gone up? And why are you laying people off? You know, that is, you know, it's the race to the bottom, yes, but it just doesn't really it does not seem sensible or logical. So maybe we can get back to logic, the logic of nature, which we've talked about. Nature gives us lots of examples of how things get fixed and how sometimes things die, but other things come to take their place. And maybe we can learn more from that. What we would love to get out of this is where you see us going in the immediate future. What can we do? What can we do right now? What are some of the ideas you've gotten that might help us and help our audience
Okay.
embrace this change?
So I think in terms of ecosystems. I don't think in terms of organizations and set numbers of people on set contracts doing set things. I think in terms of willing contribution and voluntary engagement. And so I have a vision, things that I would like to achieve within our business. I've also very deliberately created an organization that will never have more than 2 employees, because I know that remarkable things can be achieved using people who work on an on-demand basis. And that gives me, as the leader of my organization, it gives me the agile edge. It means I'm not tied down by obligation. My work is to create environments that people want to come back to, environments that people relish and enjoy. So I guess to some extent, and I love the work of Priya Parker when she wrote her book, The Art of Gathering. You know, if we actually focused on the people that we want to host or convene rather than what we personally want to get out of whatever that convening is, then you know the gathering will be exceptional when we think about others before ourselves. So for me, I am absolutely engaged in playing with the idea of building a talent ecosystem that delivers the results that I would like to see in the world. By the way, I would also add into that, you know, given that we are at the outer constraints of our natural resources on this planet, I think we also need to fairly urgently redefine what we mean when we talk about value, because I think we need to start thinking about it in a non-financial way. But when I think about achieving extraordinary things, I think about the ways in which I can create conditions, you know, and contexts in which people will want to willingly engage to achieve shared outcomes. And that means that I have to focus on my communication skills, my relationship building skills, my ability to hopefully create cohesion and the want to partake in team activities rather than individualist self-serving activities. When I think about that in a business setting, I also then think about how that overlays into a community setting. I think about what value can my business bring to my local community, and Working the Future is working with a community group here in the UK to provide support, some financial support, but some volunteer support as well, just to, you know, to push out and to progress things that need progressing. I guess what I find myself thinking about is a set of goals that I would like to see our business achieve, alongside the ways in which I can materialize those outcomes. And I cannot do it by myself. I am reliant on an ecosystem of others. And if I prioritize their needs alongside our desired outcomes, things manifest.
Oh, one last thing. If people want to learn more about you and your work, where can they find you?
Thank you. So our URL is workingthefuture.com, all one word. I'm on LinkedIn, Cathryn Barnard on LinkedIn, Cathryn Cathryn. Hopefully that will be in the show notes. We talked about that beforehand. And yeah, come and say hi. I mean, I think, you know, the challenges that we face are indescribably complex. But the one thing that I do know with absolute passion and conviction is that we will not be able to navigate them if we silo ourselves from one another. We can only do this in community. And so the more relationships we can have with one another, where we authentically commit to learning about the motivations and needs of other people, then the further we will get together.
Beautifully said.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kat, for your insights and your perceptions of this that I think are going to help our audience. And as far as working the future goes, I know we'll be talking in the future and helping to create that future together with you. And thanks for joining EarthWork Collective. And we'll talk again soon.
Thank you. I really appreciate you thinking of me, and I've really enjoyed the conversation with both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Welcome. Take care. Hi. Goodbye.